I know Camp Hill well.
Hold it closer.
Pardon me?
Hold it closer.
Sorry, I don't do a lot of speaking, so I need to be tutored on how to use this. Actually, I moved here when I was a year and a half. However, I was born from my grandparents' house on our front street where we live now, so I grew up on both sides of the river, both in Harrisburg and Camp Hill for that matter. What we want to look at tonight is the PowerPoint presentation we put together on retail in Harrisburg, and primarily in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And quite frankly, if I speak like this, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You cannot?
Yes.
Okay, because this is a little cumbersome.
Maybe if you move closer to the radio screen.
We'll try this.
Yeah.
Move closer.
But the presentation is centered on Mary Sachs, and the reason why is the Mary Sachs Charitable Trust, which exists and is a foundation to give scholarships to students, primarily in merchandising and fashion design, has been operating for years, and they wanted to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the establishment of Mary Sachs in 1918. And in doing so, they commissioned the Historic Harrisburg Association to put together an exhibit, and the exhibit is complete. We did this back in September, and it has been on display at the Historic Harrisburg Association at 30 and Burbank Streets in Harrisburg. However, we also have it in a PowerPoint presentation, and this is the first time that this has been seen as a PowerPoint presentation, as opposed to just an exhibit. So in doing so, we can start, and can we lower the lights?
Yeah.
Wayne?
Do you want to move any of this?
No, this is
Can
fine,
you all
I think,
see?
so long as everybody can see
Can you
okay.
all see?
I never know how close to get this as to whether it's too loud.
No, that's good.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So we start with a collage, and the collage is kind of like a table of contents just to show a feel for everything that was downtown, or some things that were downtown during the period, centering with the Mary Sachs building and other establishments, which we will get to as we move along. Now, Mary Sachs was born in Lithuania in 1888, and her family emigrated to the United States in the early 20th century in Baltimore initially. And Mary came to Harrisburg when she was 19 years old in 1907. And this is an earlier shot of her, of course, probably taken in the 1930s. And this is a later one, probably taken in the 1950s. When she came to the Harrisburg area, she first got a job at Kaufman's department store. And Kaufman's department store was on Market Square, and the building on the left is that. And that is where the Sears was later established. And then after that, it was demolished, and the bank building, which was Commonwealth National Bank at the time, was built, and it's now the administration building of the Dauphin County government. But it was at that location where she started. In 1907, I believe, is when she started. Several years later, she went to Schleicher's. And Schleicher's, which is this photograph, was on North 3rd Street between Walnut and Market. And of course, now it's an office building. And this is Court Street, running right here. What we were able to do is to find some newspaper articles of the time posted talking about how she went from one establishment to the other to Schleicher's. And she got along very well with Mr. Schleicher, apparently. But after he passed away in 1917, she didn't get along with Mrs. Schleicher very well, as it turned out. So what happened was she wanted to leave, she wanted to start her own business, and lo and behold, the Loengard family, specifically Harry and Leon Loengard, which had a Courier Press, and the Loengard building on 3rd Street, took a chance with her and said, I'll rent you the first floor. If you want to open your own shop, please come and we'll work with you on that. That happened in 1918. So therefore, the milestone year of the 100th anniversary. This article, of course, talks about the beautiful new store opened by Miss Sachs. Interior is handsome because she was very focused, of course, on design, on presentation, on beauty, etc. And initially, it was a success. Several years later, in 1920, she wanted to expand. And she expanded to what was the Judge Weiss Mansion on 3rd Street. This is where she opened initially. Right next door was the Weiss Mansion. Cool Victorian house, as you can see. And another newspaper article that talks about how she purchased the building next door and enlarged her store. Unfortunately, though, what happened in 1931 is the Weiss Mansion burnt. There was a substantial fire, and it did not deter her. And I think at the time, she was able to have a space in the old Harrisburg Hotel until her new building was completed. And this, of course, was the building which still stands today, although it was added on to later, which we will get to. But we wanted to show some imagery of the original store, and these are shots that were taken right after it opened in 1930, at the end of 1931, early 1932. Moving on, we were able to get into a portfolio in the Pennsylvania State Archives that had the interior of her store was professionally photographed. And this was a very large portfolio, oversized photographs. She probably commissioned a highly professional photographer to do it. And it was very Art Deco in design. Many of you may have been in the store at some point, may remember some of these features. It was very stylistic, very unusual for Harrisburg, very much Fifth Avenue. And that was her take on things. She went to New York all the time to buy. Actually, she went to Paris also to buy. And obviously, she was known for high quality, for the innovation she brought to retailing at the time, gift wrap, valet parking, and other things that just weren't done. And the store continued on very successfully. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing next. Another shot of the interior. Again, these are all photographs from 1932, showing the mezzanine, the entrance to the store being to the left, and you can get a feel for the quality and the uniqueness, especially for that period in the early 1930s in Harrisburg, of what the store looked like. Several additional shots of the interior of the store of the period, 1932. The talking over room, where she would have folks, women come in or whomever that wanted to be fitted or wanted to order dresses. That's where they sat and talked over with her what they wanted to pursue. And so another shot, too, of the interior. Several more. The shoe department at that time. And if some of you may have been in there in the past, it may have not looked the same, maybe it did, but again, these are shots of the period of 1932. So 2 more shots of her, probably taken obviously a bit later, just showing how stylish she was in her clothing and her appearance and her presentation. Of course, Mary Sachs lived till 1960. She died in 1960. The store continued on through her sister, Hannah Sachs, until 1968. And at that point, the store was sold to Hess's. And some of you may remember that the store did continue under the Hess's name after it left the family. And unfortunately, it only lasted for another 10 years and did close in 1978. But going back to the building itself, we wanted to show the evolution of the original 1931 structure on the left. In 1937, she added the upper 2 floors, and in both cases, Laurie and Green was the architectural firm that designed both the original building and the addition above. However, later she acquired what was known as the Cluster building. I'm not sure if she acquired it or expanded into it, but she did expand into it. And you can see the Mary Sachs, and that's where there were several other additional departments that were part of Mary Sachs complex. kind of moving back a little bit from Mary Sachs, we just want to take a look downtown Harrisburg at the period. And this is, of course, shots from the 1940s for the most part. Market Square in the upper left. You can see the buses and the hustle and bustle. The shoppers on Market Street, bus, and this is down where Bowman's was for the most part. Lower left, Market Street, there was a parade at that time. And then, of course, I had mentioned Kaufman's earlier. Later it became Sears. So this was the same building that was the Kaufman store, and it became Sears later on. Then we have another shot of downtown, just to try to give a feel for, again, for the period that we're talking about. Christmas decorations on Market Street, the old courthouse on Market Street, lower left, which was demolished, of course, for Kresge's for a period of time, and then is now site of the Whitaker Center. And the lower right is on Market Square, and the Patriot News was located there on the northeast quadrant before they built their building, which was just demolished, unfortunately, on Market Street in the early 1950s. And here we have a crowd looking at the scores, I think, for the World Series of that time. Now, we can't talk about retail without talking about the hotels. Penn Harris, of course, was a distinguished hotel, to say the least. Built in 1918, was a site for many events, many trade shows, many folks and retailers entertained there. It was a center of activity in the downtown, and you can see the lobby area and the plantation room, which was the forward dining room in the hotel. Unfortunately, as we will remember, it was imploded in 1973 and became a surface parking lot for a year or two, and then thankfully Harristown Development Corporation, along with all the other partners, was able to develop Strawberry Square on the site, or at least on a portion of the site. The other hotel was the Harrisburg, which still is there, one way or the other. And that was, of course, completed in 1930, and continued on until the 1960s. It is now the Fulton Bank building, primarily offices, but we want to mention it because it played a significant role in the cultural life of downtown Harrisburg at the time. Now, moving ahead a little more, 1946, Mary Sachs wanted to open a men's division. And my dad, at that time, was already had a small retail store on Strawberry Alley. He went into a partnership with Byron Kriego right before World War II. And Kriego sold the shoes, my dad sold the suits. And then after the war, their partnership split up for one reason or another. And Mary Sachs said, I want you to open my men's division. So in 1946, the 212 shop, which was part of the Mary Sachs complex, was opened by my father. And that's a photograph of him there taken probably in the mid-1940s. A photograph of him in the center with his staff. Upper left was in the guest book of the period. That was very nice that Mary Sachs wrote in the guest book. It is with pride and pleasure that I register my name in this book as your first account. With warmest wishes for your success, Mary Sachs. And also she published an ad, and she used to do this. She wrote advertisements that really talked about stories many times. There was text. She would talk about people. She always tried to be positive in the way she portrayed things. And this was a Father's Day memo to my sister. So it says, Alan Stewart, father of little Anne. And my sister, of course, also a Camp Hill High School graduate and a bit older than I. Moving on with my dad's store and the 212 shop, he also strived for quality in terms of his presentation and the quality of his goods. He was well known in that regard. And his store was featured in a national fashion publication, Apparel News, and we just wanted to include that in that they showed the facade, and it's along 3rd Street, the front of the store, some of the interior shots, as well as a shot on the left. That store did communicate internally with the Mary Sachs shop, so that when folks were inside shopping at Mary Sachs, they would go right in to the 212 shop without going outside. And then in 1950, the Commerce Building was erected at 2nd and Pine Streets. And my dad became the lead ground floor tenant in 1950 when that building was completed and left Mary Sachs. And the story goes that she was very upset about it. She wanted him to stay with her in the men's fashion industry, men's fashion retailing. And these are some shots that show the windows of his store and add a photograph of him taken a bit later than the earlier shot that you saw. And I really don't favor him at all. My mother was dark and he was fair, so, but he was my father. The store remained until 1975, and then retail in downtown Harrisburg in the mid-1970s, and particularly men's fashion, was challenged, to say the least. And so the store did, unfortunately, have to close, and my father moved on to greener pastures around the same time. So going away from Mary Sachs and my dad, we want to talk about some other downtown stores and department stores too. Bowman's, of course, many of you will recall. This is an early shot of the building, taken in the 1920s, and also the vestibule, which you can see on the left looking out on the Market Street. It was founded in 1871, lasted until about the late 1970s, and I just want to note when we talk about things like this, that there's obviously a Camp Hill connection to many of these stores. You know, when I was growing up, you worked in Harrisburg and you lived in Camp Hill, and that was it. And James K. Bowman, as an example, was the grandson of the founder of Bowman's, was involved with the company, and lived at 330 Willow Avenue, which is the big stone house that's on Willow Avenue between Lincoln and the bypass. Ironically, later on, it became the home of Al Coons, and Al Coons was involved with the Allied Department Stores, which was Pomeroy's. So we had Bowman's, and then we had Pomeroy's in the same house. But Jim and Bowman built the house in the 1930s. Moving on to Pomeroy's. Originally known as Dodge, Pomeroy, and Stewart, and S-T-E-W-A-R-T, dating to 1878. The building expanded over time. At one point, it was known to be one of the largest department store outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh in the late 1890s. So we wanted to capture a couple of early historic shots of the building. And then going from there, in 1939, it was determined that the store had to be modernized. So the facade, which many of you may remember, was applied to the same building, but it was a 1939 facade. And we were just trying to show an early representation, a photograph, a shot of the interior, and of course, as was mentioned earlier, the tea room, which many of you may also remember being in Pomeroy's. The store only lasted until 1989. It was demolished in 1990. And what I remember was that it was a very hard building to demolish. It was built of iron, I think, just not steel, but of iron. And had a heck of a time getting it down. It remained a parking lot for a couple of years, and then finally and thankfully, it's now the site of Harrisburg University. Going on from there, we wanted to look at Goldsmiths, being obviously a very high-end and well-established furniture store on Market Square, going back to 1881. And then Emily Goldsmith took it over. That's on the next panel, but we can start with this one. That's shots taken in the mid-1920s. And they even put out a magazine, February 1924, Goldsmiths Magazine, which is cool, to say the least. But we have to talk about Goldsmiths because of what they represented in the city and the area. These are later shots of Goldsmiths from the 1950s interior. The same building on the left, even though it was changed somewhat. Kuhn's Menswear was in there likewise, but they were related. Kuhn's and the Goldsmiths were related, and at some point the Goldsmiths took over the entire building. Of course, this is Dick and Joe Goldsmith, who are the grandsons of the founders, and neither of them are living anymore. In fact, Dick died only 2 or 3 years ago, I think. Going from there is Krieger's at 2nd and Walnut Streets, which is now the bank. Of course, Krieger's had a store in Stone Harbor also at the time. That's a photograph of Byron Krieger taken in our living room where I live now in 1939, in that he was at my parents' wedding party when they were married in 1939. So I cropped that out of the wedding shot, just to try to have an image of him. Ratcliffe and Schwartz, Hickey Freeman clothes, suits, on 3rd Street next to the Payne Shoemaker building. The building is still there, but obviously the store is not. Another well-known men's clothing store downtown. And I knew Chow Ratcliffe, lived in Camp Hill, lived in Country Club Hills. I knew Byron Krieger, lived at 25th and Walnut, where Mark Vickery lives now, same house. And another direct Camp Hill connection to downtown. From there we go to Douthick's, men's clothing store and boys for that matter on Market Street. This is the building under construction in 1925, and then some other shots right after it opened. You can see it's an old vehicle. And then a later shot that was taken in the early 1970s. Of course, Douthick's was founded by I.H. Douthick. His son, Tim Douthick, Tim Douthick was his grandson, who was mayor of Harrisburg, of course. But Tim Douthick was not involved with the Douthick's men's clothing business and opened his own store, which you may recall, in the West Shore Plaza. But ultimately, the store became managed and owned by the Wells family, Jesse Wells and Dave Wells. I knew Dave Wells also. He lived in Country Club Hills. So actually on Fairview Road, I believe, down near the Convoy Creek. Kaplan's on the square was very well known for its appliances, its record department in particular, jewelry and the like. That, of course, was closed and demolished with the rest of the buildings in the northeast quadrant of the Market Square for the Hilton, which opened in 1990. So, and this tower back here is the old Dauphin County Courthouse, because this shot was taken when it was still there before the current courthouse was completed in 1943 at front of Market Streets. So we want to note, of course, that that's what that feature is. Troops Music House, southeast quadrant of Market Square. In business for many years, well known. A lot of people took piano lessons there, maybe, sheet music. Very well established. And the building, believe it or not, is, the remnants of the building are still there, which is part of the M&T Bank complex. But we want clearly to note the J.H. Troop Company likewise. And Murphy's, that was one of the 3 well-known 5 and dimes downtown at the time. Murphy's Woolworths, which is the space is part of Strawberry Square now, and Kresge's, which I mentioned earlier, across the street, which is which is now the site of the Whitaker Center. Murphy's, of course, continued on, and now is the site, the same building of the Sci-Tech High School, even though it's been substantially renovated and altered. It's essentially the same structure. Going from there is Cantor Shoes. Now, Hannah Sachs, who was Mary Sachs' sister, married Ben Cantor, and Ben Cantor had Cantor Shoes on South 3rd Street. It was well known, and we wanted to include it, of course, because of the connection with Mary Sachs. The photograph on the left is a photograph of Mary Sachs and her sister Hannah to her right as looking at the photograph. The youth center was a well-known store a bit later in time period for kids and youth and so forth on Market Street. And we wanted to include that because the Sussman family is still about, and we're hoping that they could be included in our exhibit, which we have because they were able to give us some archival material. Obviously, there are a lot of stores, a lot of establishments downtown, and we couldn't hit on all of them. And what really drove us to a great degree was the imagery, because we wanted to be able to show images of these places. So we scoured as much as we could, even going to families, as an example of the Sussman family. Now, going away from the downtown, we do want to note Mary Sachs' home on North Front Street, at Front and Manor Streets, just north of Division. It is now part of the Manor on Front Bed and Breakfast. Several years ago, there was a huge controversy about Mary Kay, Nagsbeck, fashion designer, or interior designer, wanted to tear down all three of the homes between Manor and Division to build a mid-rise condominium complex, which would have walled off the Academy Manor neighborhood. And there was a lot of controversy, a lot of objection to it, and it started Harrisburg. In fact, I remember picketing on Front Street, which ended up on the front page of the Patriot News, that not to object to the demolition of these buildings. Thankfully, it didn't happen. Mary Kay withdrew her plans, and 2 of the 3 buildings are now part of the bed and breakfast on Front Street, the Mary Sachs home being one of them, and then the one on the corner at Division is now a single-family home, going back to residential, which is what we'd like to see to the extent that we can on Front Street, of Erica and Christopher Price. So a preserved block, but we wanted to show Mary's home. Here she is out front, I think in the early 1940s with some guys from World War II, and also Eleanor Roosevelt was there and was a friend of Mary Sachs and visited with her, and there's a photograph of the 2 of them together. Mary was out many places and knew a lot of people, a lot of celebrities. She was very much in demand, and many of them came to Harrisburg to visit with her. Coming towards the end, this was the 42nd anniversary of the opening of the store in 1960, and we just wanted to include 2 shots of the windows that they had at that time. That was 1960, and of course she passed away in 1960. And with that said, these were 2 articles that we found that were really not articles, but they were advertisements in a sensitive, diplomatic way. She talked about the fact that she's in New York, she'll be home soon. She didn't come home. She died in New York. But then the firm put the legacy of a great example to honor her after her death. So our last slide is about downtown Harrisburg now, just to show that, yeah, things are really happening in the 40s, but they're happening now too. Downtown has shifted a bit away from retail, even though we want to see as much retail as we can, but a lot's happening with education. Harrisburg University, of course, is becoming very successful. There's a lot of developments